Hi everyone, it's Tuesday, May 27th. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Benit Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom, and here are your top stories this afternoon. Well, a historic speech by King Charles has officially opened up Parliament today. In Ottawa, he addressed Canada's unique identity, echoed many of Prime Minister Mark Carney's election promises, and called these times a moment of opportunity. He also subtly addressed the issue of tariffs and annexation taunts from the U.S., and here's one of his moments from the speech.
When my dear late mother addressed your predecessors 7 decades ago, she said that in that age and against the backdrop of international affairs, no nation could live unto itself. It is a source of great pride that in the following decades, Canada has continued to set an example to the world in her conduct and values as a force for good. As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
So reflections on Canada's sovereignty. The speech is mostly written by the Canadian government, and Queen Elizabeth II delivered the speech in Parliament in 1957 and 1977. So some history there. And the city of Vancouver has walked back from a supportive housing project in Kitsilano. It had previously defended this project, which would have been situated at Arbutus and 8th Avenue. The mayor's office says it became clear the location wasn't a good fit for a development of the scale and the type of housing that it was proposed. Housing Minister Ravi Kahlon says the city's reversal is unfortunate.
Yeah, well, it's disappointing because we know there's people right now in that community sleeping in encampments, sleeping in parks, and we need to get people indoors to get them supports. The city did own that land, and they've made a decision not to proceed, and so now we'll have to find another parcel of land or possibly purchase something to build supportive housing.
He says the government will continue to find other opportunities for supportive housing in Vancouver. And a BC man has been charged with murder in the death of an infant in 2023. Williams Lake RCMP were called to the local hospital December 8th for a report of a deceased 7-week-old child. Police say the infant showed signs of trauma. They also say that when they went to the family home, they found another child suffering from trauma. The BC Prosecution Service has charged Russell Solomon with second-degree murder and assault causing bodily harm. RCMP say he was arrested last Friday and remains in custody. And at Harrison Hot Springs, the BC government has ordered to restore the free natural hot spring pools that were suddenly filled with dirt and boulders last fall, if you remember. The government says it's working with the nearby Harrison Hot Springs Resort to repair that stream, which has been a pretty public and popular spot. However, the community's mayor says a new fence has been put up around the natural spring, making it unavailable for public use. And he calls that fence inappropriate at best and says it could be seen as disrespectful. And you are updated this afternoon. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Benit Brach. Stay with us. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. King Charles delivered the speech from the throne today, saying that Canada is seeing a renewed sense of national pride, unity, and hope at a critical time. But what is Canada's identity right now, and what stood out for you in the speech? And sneezing, itchy eyes, and runny noses, are your allergies getting the best of you? And are allergies actually getting worse? I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. How do you feel about the speech from the throne that King Charles delivered? And what should the government be focused on now? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. As always, you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. King Charles and Queen Camilla have wrapped up their whirlwind two-day royal visit to Ottawa. This morning, the King opened Parliament by delivering the throne speech. He began by praising Canada's unique identity and highlighted its British, French, and Indigenous roots. Charles also echoed Prime Minister Mark Carney's election promises in the speech, which was written by the Canadian government for the most part. Prime Minister Mark Carney invited King Charles to visit Canada and to give the speech amid sovereignty threats from U.S. President Donald Trump. In his address, King Charles offered words of encouragement to this country.
As I've said before, every time I come to Canada, a little more of Canada seeps into my bloodstream, and from there straight to my heart. I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity, which is recognized across the world for bravery and sacrifice in defense of national values and for the diversity and kindness of Canadians. Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Fundamental change is always unsettling. Yet this moment is also an incredible opportunity, an opportunity for renewal, an opportunity to think big and to act bigger, an opportunity for Canada to embark on the largest transformation of its economy since the Second World War. Honourable Senators, members of the House of Commons, when my dear late mother addressed your predecessors 7 decades ago, she said that in that age and against the backdrop of international affairs, no nation could live unto itself. It is a source of great pride that in the following decades, Canada has continued to set an example to the world in her conduct and values as a force for good.
And yes, we want to hear from you. What stood out to you in the throne speech? What is Canada's identity in the world right now? And what do you want the federal government to really focus on now? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, or email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now to take your calls is Hamish Telford. He is an associate professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley. Hello, Hamish. Hamish, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Amy.
So what were your thoughts while you were listening to the throne speech today?
I thought it was quite remarkable. Canadians have long differentiated themselves from Americans. We define ourselves by not being American. But in that effort, we typically point to social programs, healthcare, multiculturalism as the things that differentiate us, not our ties to the crown and the monarchy. And of course, the whole purpose of this visit was to exemplify those very ties to the crown as a way that differentiates us from Americans. I think this was probably the strongest restoration of the crown that I've seen in my lifetime in Canadian politics. I think most Canadians don't typically think about the crown, and if we do have conversations about it, it's about abolishing ties to the crown. This is quite extraordinary what we're seeing here today.
And it does sort of tie in with that sense of the renewed sense, I would guess, of sort of that patriotism and pride in being Canadian and joining together as Canadians. Sort of perhaps returning to some of those more traditional values that the royal family has stood for. Is there a danger at all of alienating those some people? As you said, we talk about abolishing the monarchy many times. So for those people that perhaps do not enjoy that facet of Canadian history, do we sort of risk alienating them and further turning them away from that Canadian sense of pride?
Well, that's the risk that Mark Carney took in inviting the king over for this occasion. But we are in this extraordinary moment of unity. Well, I say that with caveats.
There's always caveats.
There are always caveats. One of the remarkable things that we saw in the election, of course, were Quebecers sort of turning towards the federal government for support, but we're seeing Alberta perhaps turning away from the federal government. I don't know if Alberta is going to be offended by the presence of the king here. You would expect that to be in Quebec, but perhaps not at this particular juncture. And I think one of the ways that we can restore the value of the crown in Canada, or one of the ways it can be restored, is by the king's behavior himself. And I thought that he was on point today. I think Canadians would, for the most part, be proud of his performance today.
It was incredibly sort of, flattering and talking about his love for Canada. He did a land acknowledgement at the beginning of the speech. So it was sort of very Canadian in that sense. And it seemed to be aiming to build us up, to make us feel proud of who we are and where we live. Hamish, we already have a bunch of calls coming in, so I'd like to get to a couple. Sean in Sechelt. Hi, Sean.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
I sure can. What are your thoughts on the speech from the throne today?
I thought it was very good, and I agree with the good professor there that this is something that separates us or gives us a uniqueness. It's really a symbolic uniqueness, because really we have much more going for ourselves if we start trading within each other within the provinces. We supply a lot of the world's food. We could be the North American hot spot for sustainable energy. We have, we have oceans, we have rivers, we have sun, we have wind, we have the sun all over the place. So there's so many opportunities for us now, and this is a symbolic kickoff, I think. I like it.
Well,
I'm a fan of it.
I appreciate that, Sean. Thank you for that. And Hamish, I was going to sort of talk to you. This ties into what Sean was saying. Sort of in terms of the key messages. It was all about building. We're building a more affordable Canada. We're building a stronger Canada. We're building our industries. And is there, as we're also feeling this sense of pride and patriotism in Canada, are we going to be sort of focusing more on building up our industries, building up our self-reliance?
Well, of course, we should always be building our industries. The challenge, of course, is, Sean mentioned, Canada has always been blessed with natural resources. Yes. The challenge is getting those resources to market. And we've always done the easy thing. We've shipped most of those of our resources to the United States. But now we really do have to think strategically about getting those resources to other markets. And Mark Carney is very focused on developing those markets in Europe. His first foreign visits his first country was France, then followed by the United Kingdom. Having the king here today, I think, is illustrating the ties that he wants to build for Canadian security as well as for the Canadian economy.
One thing I did want to mention is, as I mentioned off the top, the majority of the message is written by the federal government. The king is not in any way influencing, policies and politics. But how much of the king himself did you sense in that message off the top when he was speaking as himself and sharing his own personal message?
Yes, we did hear his views, and I think it was heartfelt. As you mentioned, he did a land acknowledgement, and he spoke about Canada's efforts at reconciliation and acknowledged his own learning in that regard. He also thanked Canadians for their service, their sacrifice to the wars in Europe and in Asia. And I think that that was also important. You know, Canada has come under some criticism for its shortcomings in military spending, but when push has come to shove, Canadians have always shown up to fight, and we have sacrificed. And I think the King was, again, heartfelt in his acknowledgement of that facet of Canadian history as well.
And did you see it at all as sort of, you know, reading between the lines, perhaps aimed at President Trump at all, in sort of reminding him who Canada is as an ally, who Canada is as a country, and not somebody waiting to become the 51st state?
Absolutely, and I think that was the whole point of the exercise that was orchestrated by our government, and the King played his role in that, I think, quite well, or superbly, in fact. I think the Americans will have noticed this. Anyone who paid attention to it will have noticed the differences. And I think it's often considered that Canadians are sort of understated Americans, and the whole event had that understatedness. You know, it's sort of comparable to a U.S. State of the Union address. But, you know, the Prime Minister, our leader of government, you know, sat on a stool at the side, well, obviously in service to the King. Other players had a role in this, the Sergeant at Arms, the Usher of the Black Rod, the Speaker of the House of Commons. There was no standing ovations throughout the speech. We let the King read the speech, sort of, you know, I think exhibiting not just only different traditions, but a different culture.
True, and it was entirely steeped in tradition and culture. But I did want to sort of talk to you about those similarities and differences. If a speech like this, as you say, a State of the Union was given from the state. So thank you for mentioning that. I just want to get a couple more calls in, though. We've got one from Cody in Trail. Hi, Cody.
Hello, Amy. Good afternoon, Professor Telford. It's lovely to talk with both of you today.
And so how did you feel after hearing King Charles's speech?
I've never felt more prouder as a Canadian and as a British Columbian than to hear King Charles say that there's a unique diversity and kindness about Canadians, because we've really came, like we're at the forefront of coming and helping our neighbors when they need help, like we did with Jasper and all the wildfires, like Kelowna and everything, like and even the tragedy in Vancouver. Like whenever we're asked, we never say no. We're there, and we're like, how can we help? Like, where can I give my time? Do you need, like, what do you need? Like, do you need supplies? Like, what do you need? And it makes me so proud as a Canadian and as a British Columbian to have King Charles read the speech from the throne, and the and like Professor Telford was saying, just the sense of pride that all the members of the Senate and the House of Commons had listening to the speech, and not giving a standing ovation, but getting every word that King Charles was saying, as his late mother did. And it was really nice to hear that he dropped the ceremonial puck at a street hockey.
Yeah, if you're going to touch on all the traditions, it's good to get a puck drop in there as well.
Pretty
Randy,
much.
I'm going to have
hockey is Canada's game, and like I've been saying, Canada is not for sale, and we will never be the 51st state.
I hear you. Thank you for that. Wendy in Kimberley, how are you today?
Hi, great.
And did you see the speech this morning?
Oh, I heard it on the radio, CBC radio.
Lovely.
And it was excellent. I thought he was excellent. He was
good.
a good speaker, and he was very diplomatic about Trump.
He is very good at being diplomatic. So I think that was the line he had to toe. Thank you for that, Wendy.
Well, that's basically all I have to say. But if you ask me something, I can answer.
We've got so many other calls coming in, Wendy, but I appreciate you so much. Actually, I do have a couple of emails that I want to get to as well before I get back to you, Hamish. Scott in Burnaby writes, in response to the throne speech, the #1 priority for Canada must be sovereignty and security through electrification. That means connecting new loads and new clean generation to the grid and unifying our new clean generation to the grid and unifying our siloed regional systems, like linking Yukon to BC, Alberta to the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut to Manitoba and Quebec. A national grid will unlock real efficiency gains. Every time we electrify, we save energy. Battery EVs are over 90% efficient, while gas cars waste 70% of their fuel. Let's build the grid to power our future and connect our nations. Hamish, do you feel that sort of right out of the gates now, it's going to be very important what Prime Minister Carney and his government focus on? You know, that sort of first, it's not a first impression, but, you know, all the pomp and ceremony is done now. It's time to get to work.
Now it is indeed time to get to work. The House of Commons will have a debate on the throne speech, and of course they need to vote on it. This will be the first test of confidence for the Liberal minority government. I think they'll probably achieve that. But then they have to, you know, start implementing the policies that they articulated during the election campaign. Mark Carney has raised expectations that he can get things done faster than the last government, and that it's all about results. And it's harder than it sounds. I recall 10 years ago, the Trudeau government, Justin Trudeau, brought over a guru from the United Kingdom to teach them about the arts of deliverology, about how to deliver results. Yeah. And they appointed the deputy minister of results. So we've heard prime ministers use this language before. It's harder to produce those results than it is to say it. So you know, good luck to Mark Carney in producing results.
We had an email from Randy, and he writes, if the Rearm Europe policy announcement is an indication of our direction, we need a vocal rejection of it. Couple that with the NATO demands for 5% of GDP spending on yearly military purchases. We're going in the wrong direction. What happened to the 70s and much of the 80s when Canada was neutral and an honest broker of peace? I remember Jean Chrétien standing up to the warmongers several times. The world may have changed, but we didn't have to. And of course, Brandy is referring to the sort of building a stronger Canada, which they point out is sort of building a safer Canada and investing in the military, investing in border security. How do you think that's going to play out in the next several months?
I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges that Mark Carney faces. We're already under intense pressure to raise military spending to 2% of GDP. And now it looks like NATO wants to raise that to 5%. No country is spending 5%. I think Poland is the highest at 4 or maybe 4.5%. Even the Americans are about 3.2% of GDP on military spending. So it was a tall order for us to get to 2, next to impossible for us to get to 5 anytime soon. And of course, as we increase military spending, that has implications for other policies, either less spending there, more debt, and or higher taxes. So this is going to be very, very thorny issue for Mark Carney and his government.
Joanne from Victoria wrote in, Canadians need to think about the relationship between Canada and the Crown, like reconciliation with Canada's First Peoples. To say Canada can change the relationship between Canada and the Crown has the same challenges. Canada was colonized by the monarchy for its wealth and resources, and only in recent years did the government recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples. So, as the King said, Canada is unique, diverse in cultures, and some histories of citizens are on a much different timeline. As we both pointed out, there was the land acknowledgement in the opening remarks of the speech. He did talk about recognizing and preserving Indigenous people's ways of living and hunting and having a safe space. But it is a very thorny issue when it comes to Canada and the monarchy, how the Indigenous people of Canada have historically been treated and their land. How do we sort of reconcile that going forward?
Well, this is going to be the challenge. Mark Carney wants to build. We heard earlier from one of our callers about developing Canada's natural resources. Well, many of these resources are in Indigenous lands, and the government of Canada has a duty to consult with Indigenous peoples and maintain the honor of the Crown in those treaties that were signed so long ago. And we can't put a timeline on it. I don't think we can predetermine how those consultations are going to go and say, well, it's all going to be said and done in 2 years. Well, no. You have to engage in the consultations and make meaningful concessions if there are concerns from Indigenous peoples about how developments might be occurring on their land. So reconciliation has to be front and center of this government's agenda.
And when we sort of talk about, we're talking about Canada and how we are feeling as a nation, after the speech and electing Prime Minister Carney, what do you think our reputation is globally? How are people perhaps seeing Canada right now?
I think there's a lot of sympathy for Canada right now, given the sort of treatment that we have received from President Trump, who's not well liked around the world. I was in England last week, and I was really quite surprised that all my English friends and relatives were all talking about elbows up. They had no idea what the phrase meant, but they were all talking about it and got the implication of it. And I had to explain to them it was a hockey reference where it came from. So I think there's a lot of sympathy for Canada, certainly in the UK and probably other parts of Europe as well at the moment. And we just have to work with our allies as we navigate this very unusual and difficult situation.
It is unusual indeed, and it'll be interesting, as we said, it's time to get to work for Carney's government, and we'll see what happens over the next several months. Hamish, always lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Amy.
Hamish Telford is an associate professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley. It is almost 12:28, and this is BC Today. And of course, yesterday we asked for your reactions to King Charles's arrival to Canada to deliver the speech from the throne. And you had some thoughts. Richard wrote, "The irony, of course, is that we have turned to the King of England to help us assert our sovereignty as a nation. In my opinion, this only serves to weaken our claim to nationhood." Owen says, "A country is a monarchy or a republic. See how well a republic is going down south. A monarchy splits power between national governments and the king, and the king is in charge of the Canadian military. A useful check and balance compared to the USA. We have a parliamentary system and are part of a greater commonwealth due to the monarchy. As for the costs, the monarchy generates at least 10 times more revenue than it costs. And don't forget the tradition. Please grow up in Canada and understand what you have." Maureen says, "Several callers to your article on the monarchy referred to the cost of the monarchy to Canadians. We pay an average of $1.55 each year to support the monarchy in Canada. That's per person. This money does not go to the routine expenses of the king. Instead, it pays for the offices of the Governor-General and Lieutenant Governor. We do not pay money to the royal family or to Britain. Ditching Canada's constitutional monarchy would still cost us. We would likely have an elected head of state, which would bear similar costs. The monarchy is a bargain, in my opinion." Sarah wrote, "The visit is all well and good, but heaven forbid something happen between the US and Canada. What exactly could Great Britain do? Seriously, the world has changed, and the king isn't as shiny as people might think." I appreciate all of the responses we got through emails and calls, and as always, keep them coming to bctoday@cbc.ca. It is a gorgeous day out there, and some of you may be suffering from allergies, so we're going to talk all about them in our second half hour. But first, it is time for the CBC Local News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The city of Vancouver has backed away from a supportive housing project in Kitsilano. It had previously defended the project at Arbutus and 8th. The mayor's office says it became clear the location wasn't a good fit for a development of the scale and type of housing that was proposed. An 18-year-old has been arrested after a stabbing in Mission that sent a 17-year-old to hospital with serious injuries. RCMP were called Friday night after reports of the stabbing involving a group of young people. Police believe the victim was targeted, but there's no word on a possible motive. And as we've been hearing on the show, King Charles says Canada faces a critical moment as the system of global trade that made it prosper undergoes a shift. He says the country faces unprecedented challenges as relationships with key allies like the U.S. come under pressure. The King delivered the speech from the throne today in Ottawa to officially open the new Parliament. And now the forecast on the North Coast: rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 12. Highs up to 21 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 21 as well. Highs in the mid-20s with lots of sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly sunny with a high of 26. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, clearing this afternoon with highs from 17 to 25 inland. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. We're headed for a busy travel season, but already Vancouver International Airport has been hit with a series of delays. YVR says this has to do in part with constraints at NAV Canada surrounding air traffic controller shortages. Pilots are noticing this, and smaller airline operators have said it's been having a huge effect. But Tim Perry, the president of the Airline Pilots Association of Canada, says it's not time to be pointing fingers.
Staffing levels are a consideration, basically across the system wide, but it's far too complex of an issue to really, I think, distill to one airport or one issue. It may have been this pilot's particular experience that day or another that it had been acute there. But I think that really the best way to look at it, the most accurate way to look at it, and the most productive way to look at it is looking at the air transportation system in Canada as a whole and looking at resources and directing them appropriately and working in collaboration with everybody who makes it work. That means pilots and all the workers across the system.
It is that time of year where we see the temperatures rising. There's the scent of blossoms in the air. Backyards and beaches beckon you. But maybe you didn't notice because you're too busy sneezing and breaking out in hives and wanting to scratch your itchy and swollen eyes out. Seasonal allergies can make it tough to enjoy this time of year. Oh, I know. And if you feel like your allergies are getting worse, it might not be all in your head. So how are allergies impacting you? Have they gotten worse? Do you worry how maybe climate change might impact them? And how do you find relief? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. For more on this, we are lucky to be joined by two guests. Johanna Wagstaffe is our meteorologist, seismologist, and science reporter. So nice to have you here.
Nice to be here, Amy.
Thank you for coming in. And Dr. Ryan Lowe is a clinical immunologist and allergist. Dr. Lowe, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Dr. Lowe, I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing and hearing from your patients this time of year about the allergies?
Yeah, I certainly hear what you have just introduced as well. There is quite a flare of seasonal allergy symptoms, especially in the past few weeks. And I'd say it kind of goes all the way back from late February till now. It's been a lot of bad sufferers of allergy, and it's in a way, I feel like I have the privilege of trying to help others in my day-to-day work, and I hope I'm able to help some others kind of on the wave today as well.
Are you seeing any people sort of coming to you with allergies for the first time, that suddenly they're experiencing these symptoms?
Absolutely. And I do feel like I have a quite diverse population in my practice. And some of them are immigrants who've come to Vancouver. And many of them have been here for a few years before they start developing these allergies. That said, that doesn't have to be a brand new environment for you to develop allergies. So absolutely, I see new patients with allergies all the time.
And Johanna, I think I've said it, hearing a lot of people say, like, this is the worst year I've ever had for allergies. I'm pretty sure I said that last year.
Yeah, I know.
And maybe the year before. So I'm concerned about this pattern. What's happening?
There is a trend there. Okay. You're right. It does seem like every year is getting worse. Yeah. And that is part of a bigger trend. Our warmer climate means longer seasons. We are seeing that pollen season start earlier, last longer. This season in particular, though, the counts happen, as Dr. Lowe said, back in February is when people are out there actually counting the pollen. Yeah. And that's when we first, we're tipped off that this is going to be a record year.
I think the amount of allergy medicine that I've been going through, I need to invest in a company.
I was just going to say, yeah.
Because at this point, it's getting a little ridiculous. Dr. Lowe, I sort of like jokingly mentioned, itchy eyes and sneezing, and you can feel pretty miserable from allergies, but it can have more serious impacts on a person. Why don't you sort of walk that through, what an allergy response can do to a person's body?
Absolutely. So I think one particularly good study to cite here is one from 2012 or so, where a group in Hamilton really surveyed quite a few different patients with allergies and got a better sense of how it really impacts their life. We know that 1 in 4 Canadians have environmental allergies, so this is really a large number of people we're dealing with. And most of the time, symptoms could be runny nose, stuffy nose, itchy eyes, all the things that you mentioned. But those all have consequences down the road. And in that particular survey, up to 70% of patients said they had some sort of daily life impact from this. And it could be something like trouble kind of concentrating at work. It could be difficulty sleeping. And in the long term, environmental allergies may even cause more life-threatening type of conditions, such as asthma or changes to the airways, such that, especially in growing kids, they might get sleep apnea and other long-term consequences.
We'd love to have people call in and join the conversation, either to let us know how allergies are impacting your life, but we'd also like to know how you manage your allergy symptoms. A lot of people have little tricks that they rely on. So you can give us a call at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. We're with our own Johanna Wagstaffe and Dr. Ryan Lowe, who is an allergist. Johanna, when we sort of look at the years getting hotter, climate change obviously impacting so many aspects of our life, how is climate change impacting allergies? It's not just that it's a longer season.
That's right. It is a bit of a double whammy. So not only is the season starting earlier, lasting longer, but those warm temperatures are also helping the plants produce more pollen rates. And at the same time, because we have more CO2 in our atmosphere, there have been many studies around the world, recent studies that show when these plants are offered more CO2 in the laboratory, they produce more pollen. Their pollen counts are higher. So they're not only getting a longer season, they're producing more pollen because of our increased CO2. And there's another factor, increased pollution. So those fine particulate matter in cities interacting with the fine particulate matter of pollen, and that's sort of wreaking havoc on the respiratory system. So it's really a 1, 2, 3 punch: hotter, more CO2, and then you've got pollution. And
Dr. Lowe, as we're sort of seeing the allergy season expand and people perhaps having more severe reactions, are we also seeing a bit more maybe study into different ways that we can manage it? Is there sort of anything new on the horizon other than just, trying to stay indoors and maybe popping a Claritin?
Oh, absolutely. So this is a great question, and I wish I had 30 minutes to talk all about it.
Go ahead. We've got lots of time.
I'll try to break it down a little bit more. For me, treating environmental allergy always breaks down into three main domains. You try to avoid all the things you're allergic to as much as possible. You can try to, and part two might be using medications that would suppress symptoms and allow people to live a normal life, but they don't really alter the allergy itself. And so if you stop these medications, the allergies might come back. And then there is part three, which is called immunotherapy, where patients really get exposed to what they're allergic to on purpose to try to get the body more and more used to it. So I've certainly seen quite a few changes in the immunotherapy domain. So we can talk briefly about that in a second. There aren't that many changes in the short-term medications domain, but we have had one or two new ones in the last few years. And then with the avoidance, there is a lot being advertised, and I see kind of in the systematic reviews in the literature, there might be a few that have good evidence, but generally speaking, they're kind of small number of patients. So we do have to take everything with a bit of grain of salt in that domain. So if I could take 30 seconds, I'll try to go through each one. But in terms of avoidance, I feel like more and more there are different devices coming out. But fundamentally, I think the going home, showering, changing clothes, wearing a mask, those are still probably the highest yield. And then in terms of medications, there are now kind of nose sprays that have a couple of different medications that sound very promising. And then from an immunotherapy perspective, there are now not many people have heard of allergy shots, but allergy shots is no longer the only option. There are now these tablets full of things like pollen that can help people overcome their allergy.
Interesting. We do have a call that's come in from Sally in Vancouver. Hi, Sally. I believe you're an eye doctor.
Oh, hi. Yes, I am. An eye
Many
doctor
smart
and
people
an
right
allergy
now.
Sufferer.
Oh, double whammy. Yes.
Yeah.
So, do you have any tips, that you use for yourself or you recommend to your patients?
Yeah, both. It certainly is a humdinger of a year and started early. And I think the frustration for many allergy sufferers is what's good for one person is bad for another, and the unpredictability of it. But I think, for eyes to recognize they're a little bit different than the rest of the body. So the barrier between kind of the bloodstream and the eyeball is quite strong. So we are most effective to go to the source. So, eye drops obviously can be very helpful, and I can go into detail if you like, both over-the-counter prescriptions, simple things like wrapped sunglasses that can protect the eye. I always like to remind myself and my patients of the power of cold compresses, the little cells in our body that release histamine. If you make those cell walls cold, they release less itch. So, a bag of frozen peas on your eyes, a cold eye drop, those can be super helpful in the moment. Eye drops are very helpful. Prescription ones tend to be a bit more effective than over-the-counter in that arena. I think your previous caller or the doctor who's still on the line recommended nasal sprays. Eye sprays are actually a new thing that you spray to the external part of the eye. Those are something new. And again, kind of the long-term ramifications, those real knuckle rubbers, particularly those teenage boys who suffer with really severe ocular allergies, those can have really long-term consequences. So I think early intervention, preventing that cascade of itch can be really helpful.
I am embarrassed to admit that I'm very much like a teenage boy and a total knuckle scratcher.
Knuckle rubbing bad. Sit on your hands. That's what I tell them. Sit on your hands and ask for a bag of frozen peas.
I've done the frozen peas. That does provide a lot of relief, but it is hard. For me, that is my main, I guess, symptom is incredibly swollen and incredibly itchy eyes, and it's very distracting. It definitely has a big impact on your life. Sally, thank you so much for calling in. Before I let you go, though, I just wonder what you're hearing from your patients. Are they also, having any new symptoms, or are they definitely seeing more acute symptoms this year?
Yeah, and I actually live out in White Rock in your neck of the woods. So I think, this year in that area with the climate change and releases, definitely far more people coming in, as you said, with those itchy, red, swollen eyes. And I think you don't want to splash a fire. So are there things that we can do to kind of really take the heat out of it, get on top of it, and then what's sort of the maintenance? But certainly out in White Rock, and I'm in Vancouver right now, it's not much better. It's a tough year. So I think remembering to try to get ahead of it, and then what's your maintenance going to look like?
All right. Thanks so much for that, Sally. And Joe, she sort of mentioned something I wanted to ask you. And it's, I can notice a difference when I'll go travel out and see my dad in White Rock. I'll go to a friend over on the North Shore.
Yes.
What are the areas, if you are really dealing with a bad allergy, you might want to consider avoiding at certain times of year?
It's really interesting because there are so many different types of pollen, and people are sensitive to a variety of different pollens. For some people, it's grasses, other people, it's trees. So you kind of have to get to know your own body. And from what I'm hearing, as long as you're listening to yourself, then you know what your triggers are. And I'm sure, Dr. Lowe, you're seeing this as well. Once you know what your triggers are, you know what areas you're going to find those more. And I'm hearing that as well. I'm actually taking notes because I have not suffered until this year. I have never felt allergies until this year. And one day I had the itchy, scratchy eyes. It took me all day to diagnose myself. And now I see what all the fuss is about.
It's not that fun.
No.
And I wish you didn't have to,
Yeah.
walk a mile in our shoes. But it is becoming more common. We got an email from Jules in Kelowna, and they write, I have never suffered from allergies, but this year I have had an unprecedented bout of hideous breakouts on my face and neck. I have no idea what it is. I've done the usual, but this is horrendous. My eyes, my cheeks, my hairline, my lips, all getting bumps and crazy itching. Sadly, my doctor has said that going to an allergy expert is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So I guess I'll just invest in allergy medication shares. Well, yes, that is my plan for retirement. But Dr. Lowe, as somebody who is a needle in a haystack, what would you recommend to somebody like Johanna or like our friend Jules in Kelowna? What do you do when this is the first time?
Yeah, it's unfortunately, nobody's born with allergies, and you do develop it over time. So I feel you, and I'm sorry to hear that things are quite bad this year. It is unfortunate that certain pockets of areas, especially in the Lower Mainland, have been underserved by different allergists. That said, I think many allergists across the Lower Mainland now, learning from the COVID experience, are offering virtual consultations through Zoom or through phone calls, and there are some investigations that can be done remotely such as through blood work. So I think one thing I would encourage, and not to self-advertise here, but I think it would be important to talk with your family doctor to see if there might be some allergists or a little bit away from the local area that could still be of help. But of course, in the meantime, as we were kind of talking about briefly, it's about avoiding the things that you're allergic to, and it's about trying maybe some of the medications that are available from over the counter. The great caller earlier mentioned things like the sunglasses and the compresses to really help in the short term. And then I think the most important thing is really trying to make home a safe space. So if it turns out to be an outdoor allergy with pollens, don't bring it home. Keep the windows closed, have a change of clothes when you get home. Some people even go so far as to shower and try to get rid of as much exposure as possible. Of course, you have to mandate this on the rest of the family too. And unfortunately, that's probably not going to be that popular. But those are some of the things that are away from medications that you can start with.
Okay.
And then, there are a few over-the-counter medication options as well, and have a chat with your doctor to know kind of what might be the best option for you.
And is there any risk, sort of to long-term use of those at-home options? Because I worry about that quite often when it's literally months and months of prolonged use that I'm having to take them for relief.
Yeah, it depends on the medication. There are some that are available over the counter that if you asked an allergist, probably they wouldn't recommend as first-line therapy. And so unfortunately, we're at a space where historically they may have been approved and it may have been carried forward for a long time. And I don't want to drop any names, but it's particularly the antihistamines that put people to sleep that almost all guidelines now are recommending avoiding. And so those ones for sure, I wouldn't recommend using for a long time.
Okay.
And even amongst the nose sprays, eye drops are definitely ones that are probably better than others. The best way is probably to have a chat with your doctor to really know which one to go ahead with.
Okay. And of course, we still have time for people to join us with their own allergy stories. If you've got any tips for managing your symptoms, or if you found a terrible allergy season for you this year, you can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Johanna, I wanted to touch base with you. I know we talked about sort of the climate change aspect worsening the situation. But going forward, is there anything that individuals can be doing, or sort of cities and municipalities can do to help mitigate these these symptoms.
Yes, especially because, a lot of these studies show that as our planet continues to warm, we are going to see increasing seasons, increasing pollen. But this is a huge area of research, this intersection between climate change, weather, and pollen. And it's something that cities are integrating. They're thinking about different ways to plant trees and flora and fauna in their cities. What are the ones that are producing less pollen? Usually it's the native species. So this is working its way into city planning. This is yet another reason why we need to mitigate and slash our greenhouse gas emissions. But again, it's a huge area of research, and we're seeing numbers, in the next 75 years, by 2100, the pollen production across North America could be up 40%.
Wow.
So this really is not just, on the individual level, but something that cities and communities need to start planning for if it's just going to get worse.
I swear I just got a hive when you said that the pollen count was
Yeah.
going to raise that much. We do have an email from Allison. It says, as a child, I had terrible allergies to pollen, as did my sister and dad. I had gone through and used all the allergy medication at the drugstore available until I became immune to them all. So what do you do when that happens? I came from a small town with no allergist, so I just suffered until the allergies finally decided to let up as I became an older adult. Does that happen? Do people sort of, I guess, get resistance to the pills that they're taking? Should you switch it off?
The antihistamine rotation seems to be a bit of a myth from what I've seen in literature, but in medicine we say never really say never. And if we have all these different options available and, one doesn't seem to be working as well as another, by all means, go ahead and switch over. If there are over-the-counter options are all unfortunately exhausted, there are quite a few prescription options now that are better. So particularly, the one that seems to work best now is this nose spray that combines the traditional nose sprays that you would get for allergies with an antihistamine inside that came out about a couple of years ago. So I think there's always evolving landscape. But perhaps more importantly, what the caller mentioned about being exposed long-term and becoming less allergic is kind of the whole goal behind the ultimate treatment that allergists can offer, which is the immunotherapy, where we give patients what they're allergic to, either through an injection or through tablets that melt under the tongue, to get the body to become more used to it and develop more of a tolerating response and an allergic response. So it sounds like, unfortunately, the caller kind of did it to themselves. But this
whether they wanted to or not, very successful treatment.
Yeah.
We have a call that's just come in from Beverly. Hi, Beverly. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you today, dear?
Doing well. How are your allergies?
I'm phoning. Oh, their allergies. Oh, they're crazy. But you know what the best thing is? And it's crazy, but it's baking soda. You just get, like a little bowl, like your cereal bowl. You pour a couple of teaspoons in there with hot water. Stir it around with your finger and get a thin washcloth and use it on your eyes. And it's just amazing.
Really?
Yeah, it just clears them right up. And even for a person that gets a sty in the eye.
Okay.
It's the best remedy in the world as far as I'm concerned. I don't know, but that's just me.
Well, I'm glad that it's working for you, Beverly. That's what matters. Thanks for sharing that. I'll have to give it a try. Lauren in Surrey. Hi, Lauren. How are you dealing with your allergies?
Pretty good. So for me, I was just telling the person off set there that I'm 76 years old, and I started allergy treatment at 21 and did the injections over a course of 2 years. And but even so, that helped quite a bit. But right now, what I go through, the worst 2 sessions of the year for me are cherry blossom time, and right now with the cottonwoods.
Yes.
So at one point in time, I discovered that there was an inhaler, a system called Beckinase, which I think might not be used anymore because it might have steroids in it or something. But now I use something called Flonase, and I tend to try and gargle whenever the sniffing and the dripping gets too bad to alleviate the tickle in the nose and throat.
That is a good... I have tried that as well, and Dr. Lowe, I've always assumed that sort of washing away some of the irritants and the pollen that does get into your nose and I guess throat. Am I on the right track?
Yeah. This is actually something that's really interesting that patients tell me all the time. During cottonwood time, when I see it, things really get bad. And often the pollens that cause the most allergy are ones that are small and maybe a little bit too tiny for us to regularly see. And around this time of the year, when we see the cottonwood, I think it's usually the grass pollen that really picks up. And so often it's sometimes can be a sign of when other pollens are coming, but it may not actually be the ones that you're seeing.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a trivia there. And then about the Beckinase and the Flonase as well. Yeah, absolutely. These are some of the intranasal steroids essentially that can help with allergies. And they are still one of the first line options available. Beckinase is still available, but it's a little bit older, and there's maybe some studies that show it may stunt growth in children a little bit more. So there are better options out there.
All right.
And just to keep things impartial, over-the-counter Flonase and Nasacort are the two that you can get within this category.
All right. And before I let you go, one thing I did want to ask is we saw, of course, widespread masking during COVID, but some people are using masks as a way to combat their allergies. Is that effective?
Absolutely. There is a study out of Japan that looked at about 14 people, relatively small study, but they compared no mask, medical masks, and N95 grade masks. And it turns out the medical grade masks and the N95 masks are about equivalent. So you don't have to go up to the N95 grade, but they were both much better than not wearing a mask at all.
All right. Excellent. And Joe, before I let you go, I want to ask you about, is it thunderstorm asthma?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure you knew the worst case scenario out there. This relatively new phenomenon where thunderstorms are picking up the pollen, splitting them into tiny pieces, getting inhaled and causing widespread asthma attacks. So we haven't seen that here yet in Vancouver. We don't get those kinds of thunderstorms often, but science is studying this one. We'll contact the movie houses to see if that's going to be made into the next blockbuster.
I don't think that's a movie that anybody needs to see.
No.
I'm calling it right now. Are you hearing anything sort of new that's coming up? We've only got about 15 seconds left, so I apologize. But new studies into allergies?
Yeah, really, this is a hot area of study for climate change scientists, and the more data and information we have, the better at finding solutions. So I'm glad that we're working on it.
All right, and that is it for our show today.